Okay, so we are looking at notes for 5-3. This is algebra, our unit on functions, and 5-3 is talking about graphical features of functions. So graphical features about functions, in more words or less, are simply just facts or characteristics. Characteristics? I think that's it. Yeesh. About the graph. That's why I'm not an English teacher. So facts, characteristics about the graph. The first major one that they ask you about or that they talk about is the behavior of the graph. Is it increasing or decreasing over specific intervals? When we talk about over intervals, our intervals are going to be written like some number is less than or equal to x, less than or equal to another number. That's an example of an interval where you will fill in the numbers. But the x always stays in the middle. You will always use x when you're talking about those intervals. So increasing or decreasing, this is simply just asking about the graph's rate of change. It's asking about the rate of change. And you might be remembering from our previous unit, hopefully, that when we talk about rate of change, that's that change in y over change in x, that y minus y over x minus x. It's simply just asking, again, if the graph is increasing or decreasing. Do you have a graph that has a positive slope or is going up? Because remember, not all of these are going to be straight lines anymore. Or do you have a negative rate of change or a graph that is going down? So positive versus negative. When you're asking about the maximum and the minimum points, there's two different kinds. There's absolute max and mins, and then there's relative max and mins. The absolute max and mins are and I'm going to use the word absolute in the definition, the absolute highest point. And your absolute min is the absolute lowest point. So when you're looking at the graph, the maximum is the point that's higher than all of the others, and the absolute minimum is the point that's lower than all of the others. These should be written as coordinate points. Should be written. That is not how you spell written. I'm struggling. As coordinate points. Keep that in mind when you're doing this. So not to confuse the absolute max and mins with the relative max and mins. These relative max and mins are also known or can be known as like your peaks and your valleys. So it's not necessarily the lowest or the highest point, but just the top of a peak or the bottom of a valley kind of a thing. I will do a little example really quick off to the side here. And if I draw a graph, let's use red. Let's do something like no, it's not good there. Oh, that's good. Womp, womp, womp. There. So if we're looking at an example like this, this is the abs max. this would be the ABS min. But these pieces over here, you have this and this. These are both also relative mins. They're those peaks and the valleys, the top of the hill or the bottoms of the hill. For your relative max and mins, it's important to realize that there can be more than one. These are what you would call your high points and your low points. Not necessarily the lowest, but those peaks and valleys. And let's finish this off all in one. Intercepts. Two different kind of intercepts, as we know from our previous workings with functions and stuff. My computer's being stupid and isn't working. Shocking. Okay, so intercepts. We have two different kinds. We have our y-intercept, which, remember, is going to be something like 0, y value, whatever that y value is. And it's important to realize when we're talking about functions in y-intercepts, functions can only have one y-intercept. Because if not, if we take a little sidebar over here, if we have two y-intercepts, if we have something like 0, 7 and 0, 8, that doesn't pass the rules for function. That has repeating x values. Repeating x is not a function. That's why functions can only have one y-intercept. So our other types of intercepts, as we are regularly or sort of familiar with, are x-intercepts. And our x-intercepts have a new fancy name. Those x-intercepts are now called zeros. Whoop. When we're talking about functions, x-intercepts can have more than one, or there can be more than one x-intercept. And that's because we can have repeating y values, but not repeating x values. These are called zeros because f of x is equal to 0, or y is equal to 0. And your x-intercepts are written as x, zeros. So just make sure you keep those two separate from each other. Your y-intercepts versus your x-intercepts there.